Some nights change you. Not in some big, dramatic way, not all at once. But in quiet, slow-burning moments. The kind that creep under your skin and stay there. You ever see something you wish you hadn't? Something that makes you question everything? Because I have. And I swear. I still think about it to this day. It started like any other night. A business trip. A hotel. A drink at the bar before heading upstairs. Just a routine. I wasn't expecting anything. I wasn't looking for anything. But sometimes, life doesn't ask for your permission before it throws you straight into the fire. I remember the moment it happened. The exact second my night shifted. I wasn't even paying attention at first, I was just sitting there, stirring my drink, half listening to the pianist in the corner playing something slow, something sad. And then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw her. At first, I didn't even register who she was. Just another guest, just another woman at the bar. But then my brain caught up. My chest tightened. My stomach dropped. Because sitting just a few feet away from me, laughing, leaning in close, whispering something into a man's ear, was my pastor's wife. Now, let me be clear, I'm not the kind of person who jumps to conclusions. I wasn't trying to assume the worst. But you know how, sometimes, you just know. You don't need proof, you don't need an explanation, you just feel it, deep in your gut. And my gut? It was screaming at me. This was wrong. Something was wrong. She wasn't just sitting there, having a drink. She wasn't just chatting casually with some friend or colleague. No, this was different. The way she touched his arm. The way she laughed, head tilted just slightly too far back, lips painted red, eyes scanning the room like she was checking for, what? A witness? A familiar face? And here's the crazy part. I almost didn't believe my own eyes. I mean, this woman. The same woman who stood beside her husband every Sunday, smiling like she had it all figured out. The same woman who led the church's marriage counseling sessions, preaching about loyalty, trust, commitment. No. No way. But there she was. Right in front of me. And the way she looked at him, was not the way a woman looks at a stranger. I should have looked away. Should have minded my business. Should have finished my drink, left a tip, and gone up to my room. But I didn't. I couldn't. Because suddenly, I wasn't just watching her. I was watching myself. My marriage. My choices. My past. My future. All of it, tangled up in that one moment. And the worst part? I wasn't sure if I was disgusted, or if I understood. Because if we're being honest here, completely honest, I knew exactly how she got there. I knew how easy it was to end up in a place you never thought you'd be. And for the first time in my life, I started to wonder if I was really any different. What happened next? Well, let's just say, that night took a turn I never could have expected. And trust me, you're going to want to hear the rest of this story. Before we go any further, though, tell me this. Have you ever been in a moment like that? A moment where you see something you weren't supposed to see? A moment that makes you question everything? Let me know in the comments. And if you're new here, make sure you subscribe, because this is just the beginning. It's funny, you know. The way life starts feeling like a script you didn't even realize you were following. Same lines, same routine, day in and day out. You wake up, you go to work, you come home. You ask your spouse how their day was, and they say, fine. And you leave it at that. Because after a while, what else is there to say? That morning was no different. I was packing for my trip, my wife was getting ready for work. She was in the bathroom, blow-drying her hair, barely even looking at me as I stuffed socks into the corners of my suitcase. She'd asked me the night before when I'd be back. I told her Friday. She just nodded, like it was a minor inconvenience, like my absence didn't really change anything. And maybe it didn't. Maybe I was the only one who felt it. The space between us. The quiet. The way we barely touched anymore unless it was necessary, like passing a cup of coffee across the kitchen counter, or brushing hands when reaching for the same towel. "Don't forget your charger," she said, stepping out of the bathroom, adjusting her earrings in the mirror. I nodded. She glanced at my suitcase, then at me. "You all set?" That was it. "No, I'll miss you." "No, have a good trip." "Just, logistics." I forced a smile and said, "Yeah, all set." And just like that, she was gone, grabbing her purse and walking out the door, already halfway into a phone call before she even shut it behind her. You'd think after 10 years of marriage, things would feel more solid. More permanent. But I stood there in that bedroom, staring at that half-zipped suitcase, and for the first time in a long time, I felt completely alone. Airports are strange places. They remind you how big the world is. How many people are out there, moving, living, laughing, loving. I sat near the window, watching planes take off, trying not to look at the couple a few seats away. The way they leaned into each other, the way she tucked her hair behind her ear when he whispered something that made her smile. That used to be us. Once upon a time. I found myself wondering, when did that stop? When did we go from sneaking kisses in grocery store aisles to barely touching at all? When did our conversations shrink down to reminders and schedules? "Dude, you look like you're contemplating life," a voice broke through my thoughts. I turned to see my friend Eric dropping into the seat beside me, smirking. We worked together, he was on this trip too. Eric was the kind of guy who never took life too seriously. Married, but in a way that seemed effortless. Like his wife still looked at him the way mine used to look at me. "Just tired," I said, forcing a small laugh. He didn't buy it. "Man, you need this trip. Get your mind off things. Maybe even let loose a little." He wiggled his eyebrows suggestively, but I just shook my head. "I'm good." Yeah. That's what they all say. Until they're 2 drinks in at the hotel bar and suddenly life doesn't feel so heavy anymore. I just laughed it off, but his words stuck with me. Because the truth. I was tired. Tired of feeling invisible in my own home. Tired of pretending everything was fine when I knew it wasn't. And somewhere, deep down, there was a small, dangerous part of me that wondered what it would feel like, to be seen again. I checked into my room, tossed my suitcase on the bed, and let out a breath I didn't even realize I'd been holding. The silence of the room was both a relief and a reminder. No kids running around. No dishes in the sink. No wife calling out from the other room. Just me. I should have called her. Should have sent a quick text. Something simple. Landed safe. Hope you had a good day. But my phone sat on the nightstand, untouched. And I sat on the edge of the bed, staring out the window at the city lights, wondering if she even noticed I was gone. I don't know what made me do it. Maybe it was the emptiness of the room. Maybe it was Eric's voice in my head, telling me to unwind. Maybe it was just the simple, human need to not feel so damn alone. Whatever it was. I found myself back downstairs, walking toward the bar. I wasn't looking for trouble that night. I wasn't looking for anything. But sometimes, life doesn't wait for you to go looking. Sometimes, it finds you first. I told myself I must be mistaken. That maybe it was just someone who looked like her. But no. It was her. And the way she leaned in, the way her fingertips ghosted over his wrist as she laughed. That wasn't a friendly conversation. That wasn't small talk. That was something else entirely. And that's when it hit me. The same woman who stood beside her husband in church every Sunday, who led prayer groups, who preached about faithfulness and trust, was sitting at a dimly lit bar, tangled in the kind of moment that could destroy everything if the wrong person saw. And the craziest part? That wrong person was me. I should have looked away. Should have walked out. But I didn't. I sat there, drink in hand, heartbeat hammering, watching as temptation played out right in front of me. And the longer I watched, the more I realized, maybe none of us are as different as we like to think. At first, I didn't think much of it. Just another couple in a hotel bar. Happens all the time, right? Business trips. Late nights. Strangers meeting for drinks that turn into something more. It's none of my business. But then I saw her. And my stomach dropped. It was like seeing a ghost. Like my brain needed an extra second to process what my eyes were already screaming at me. Because there, sitting at the bar, laughing, leaning in just a little too close to a man who wasn't her husband, was my pastor's wife. I blinked. My mind raced. Maybe I was wrong. Maybe it was just someone who looked like her. But no, there was no mistaking it. The delicate gold cross resting against the dip of her collarbone. The way she tucked a strand of dark hair behind her ear. The familiar lilt in her laugh. It was her. It was definitely her. And the man sitting next to her? He wasn't her husband. Not even close. I felt my grip tighten around my glass. My heartbeat was suddenly too loud in my ears. My pastor, her husband, was one of the most respected men I knew. A leader. A man who stood on the pulpit every Sunday, preaching about loyalty, about commitment, about honoring the vows we make before God. And his wife. She was the image of grace. Poised. Devoted. A woman who counseled other women in the church about marriage, about faith, about fighting for love even when things got hard. But now, here she was, sitting in the soft glow of the bar lights, her fingers barely brushing the man's wrist as she reached for her drink. My stomach twisted. I didn't want to believe it. Maybe there was an explanation. Maybe they were old friends. Maybe this was innocent. But then I saw the way she looked at him. Not just casual. Not just friendly. No, this was something else entirely. This was a woman who had long since made up her mind. My mind started spinning. Should I say something? Should I walk over, make eye contact, make it clear that I saw? Or should I look away? Pretend I didn't see a damn thing? Wouldn't that be easier? Just finish my drink, get up, leave, let this moment dissolve into the background like it never happened? But I couldn't move. My body wouldn't let me. Because this wasn't just any woman. This was my pastor's wife. This was someone who had stood in front of the congregation, week after week, talking about the sacredness of marriage, about resisting temptation, about doing the right thing. So, what the hell was she doing here? And more than that, why did I feel like I understood? It wasn't the first time they'd met. That much was obvious. There was a rhythm between them, an ease. The kind that doesn't happen overnight. The kind that suggests history. My throat felt dry. I took a slow sip of my drink, buying myself time, trying to think. What would this mean? Not just for her, but for my pastor. For the church. For all the people who trusted them. Who believed in them. And yet. I couldn't judge her. Not the way I wanted to. Because wasn't I just sitting here, in this same bar, drowning in my own loneliness? Hadn't I spent the past 24 hours feeling invisible, disconnected, wondering if I was even missed? Hadn't I, just for a fleeting moment, understood why someone might seek out a stolen moment of warmth? She sees me. And for the first time, I see her, not as a pastor's wife, not as the image she projects on Sunday mornings, but as a woman. A woman who is making a choice. A woman who knows exactly what she's doing. She doesn't look away. And neither do I. And that's when I realize, she's not afraid. Not of being caught. Not of being judged. Not of me. She's already made peace with whatever happens next. I don't know why, but I can't look away. My mind was racing. My pulse drumming in my ears. I wasn't supposed to see this. I wasn't supposed to know this. This woman, she wasn't just anyone. She was his wife. The same woman who stood beside him every Sunday, smiling like she had all the answers. The same woman who held hands with other women in the church, leading them in prayer, preaching about the sacredness of marriage. She was the one who told people to fight for their vows. To honor them. And now, here she was. I felt like I was intruding. Like I had somehow stumbled into something I had no business witnessing. This wasn't my marriage. This wasn't my problem. So why did I feel like I had just stepped onto a battlefield I never wanted to be a part of? A war between right and wrong. Between truth and silence. Between who we pretend to be and who we are when no one's watching. A million thoughts ran through my head all at once. Should I confront her? Should I pretend I never saw? Should I call my pastor, tell him what his wife was doing while he was probably at home, believing she was somewhere else? Or should I just get up, walk away, and let whatever was happening, happen? I didn't know what the right answer was. But I knew one thing, no matter what I chose, I wouldn't walk out of that bar the same man who walked in. I thought about my own wife. About how distant we'd become. About how we used to be the couple at the airport, laughing over inside jokes no one else understood. I thought about how she barely looked at me before I left for this trip. About how, for the first time, I wondered if she ever felt invisible in our marriage the way I did. And then, an even worse thought hit me. If I had been in her position, if the roles were reversed, would I have done the same thing? Would I have let myself get close to someone else? Let my guard down? Given in? Or was I just lying to myself, thinking I was somehow better? I should have taken that as a sign. A chance to reset. To get up and leave. But I didn't. Instead, I let my eyes drift back to her. And when I did, everything changed. This wasn't harmless. This wasn't friendly conversation. This was something else entirely. This was a choice. A decision in slow motion. And I was watching it unfold, second by second. I don't know what disturbed me more, the fact that she was doing this, or the fact that she wasn't hiding it. Not really. Not enough. She knows I'm watching. And she doesn't care. I shifted in my seat, my heart hammering against my ribs. I shouldn't be here. I shouldn't be watching this. But there I was, glued to the moment like a moth to a flame. Maybe because, deep down, I knew this wasn't just about her. It was about me. Because what scared me most, was how familiar this all felt. How easy it was to slip into something like this. How quickly a stolen glance, a lingering touch, an innocent drink with the wrong person could turn into something you couldn't take back. Because I had thought about it before. I had thought about what it would feel like to be noticed again. To be wanted again. And in that moment, sitting in that dimly lit bar, watching the pastor's wife inch closer to a man who wasn't her husband, I realized something that sent a cold chill down my spine. The only difference between her and me, was that I hadn't crossed the line. Yet. I needed to get out of there. Before I did something stupid. Before I said something I couldn't take back. Before I let the wrong thought settle too comfortably in my mind. But just as I braced myself to leave, something happened. Something I wasn't ready for. I thought maybe, just maybe, she'd come to her senses. That she'd fix her dress, make some excuse, and walk away. But then, she turned to the man, whispered something too low for me to hear, and he smiled, slow, knowing. And then, together, they walked toward the elevator. I sat there for a long time after that, staring at my untouched drink, at the space she left behind, at my own reflection in the glass, realizing that the thing I feared most about that night wasn't what she did. It was how much I understood why she did it. I should have looked away. I should have picked up my drink, turned my head, let them fade into the background like just another pair of strangers making late-night decisions. But I didn't. I couldn't. Instead, I found myself standing, tossing a few bills onto the bar, and, without fully realizing what I was doing, following them. I told myself it wasn't what it looked like. That I wasn't doing anything wrong. I wasn't stopping them. I wasn't intervening. I was just curious. That's all. Just trying to understand what I was seeing. But the deeper I walked into the dim hallway leading to the elevators, the heavier my steps felt. Like I was sinking into something I didn't fully understand. Something I wasn't sure I wanted to be a part of. My breath caught in my throat. She wasn't expecting me to be there. And for a split second, I saw something cross her face, something unreadable. Panic? Guilt? Or something worse? A challenge. It wasn't an apology. It wasn't regret. It wasn't even nervousness. No, her smile was small, subtle, knowing. A silent acknowledgement of the moment. A quiet acceptance of what she was about to do. And then, without a word, she stepped into the elevator. I don't know how long I stood there. 5 seconds. 10. A full minute. Time felt strange, warped, stretched. My feet were glued to the floor, my mind racing 100 miles an hour, but my body frozen in place. I told myself I wasn't surprised. I had seen it coming the second she touched his arm at the bar. Maybe even before that. But knowing something is coming doesn't prepare you for how it feels when it actually happens. I expected to feel disgust. Anger. Some moral outrage on behalf of my pastor. But what I felt was something else entirely. I felt like I understood. And that was the part that terrified me the most. What now? Do I tell someone? Do I call my pastor, tell him his wife is upstairs, tangled up in something that could destroy him? Do I act like I saw nothing? Pretend none of this ever happened? Go back to my room, close my eyes, and wake up tomorrow like this was just another business trip, another quiet night in a hotel? And why did it feel like, in some twisted way, this had everything to do with me? Because as I stood there, alone in that hallway, staring at the place where she had just been, I realized something I didn't want to admit. I wasn't standing there as a witness. I was standing there as someone who could have been in that elevator. Maybe not tonight. Maybe not in this hotel. But given the right circumstances, the right loneliness, the right moment, could I have been the one pressing that button? Could I have been the one standing too close to someone I shouldn't? The thought made me sick. Not because it wasn't possible. But because it was. I didn't want to think about my wife. About how I hadn't called her. About how she probably wasn't even wondering where I was. About how long it had been since she'd smiled at me the way the pastor's wife had smiled at that man. I didn't want to think about how easy it is to slip. How temptation isn't always loud and obvious. Sometimes, it's quiet. Slow. A gradual unraveling. Sometimes, it looks a lot like loneliness. And sometimes, it doesn't feel wrong until it's far too late. I wanted to believe I was different. That I'd never be capable of something like that. That my vows meant too much to me. But standing there, in that hotel hallway, watching the reflection of myself in the bar mirror, I wasn't so sure anymore. Because the truth is, we all think we know what we do in a moment of temptation. Until it finds us. I felt strange. Not drunk, not sober. Just, off. Like I had stepped into some alternate reality where everything looked the same, but nothing felt the same. I sat back down at the bar, but the drink in front of me didn't seem appealing anymore. The ice had melted, thinning whatever was left. I stared at it, my fingers tapping absently against the glass, my mind spinning. Because now that she was gone, now that I was sitting here alone again, a question I didn't want to face was clawing at the back of my mind. What if that had been me? Good night. Love you. I stared at the screen, my thumb hovering over the keyboard. I could have just typed a quick, love you too. Could have sent a simple reply, turned my phone over, and gone to bed. But something in me hesitated. Because for the first time, I wasn't sure what those words even meant anymore. Love you. Did she? Did I? Did either of us even know what that looked like anymore? I thought about how easily those words rolled off our tongues. How automatic they had become. Like a habit. A muscle memory. Something we said not because we felt it, but because we were supposed to. And as I sat there, staring at those two simple words glowing on my screen, the weight of everything hit me all at once. I wasn't guilty of anything. Not technically. Not yet. But the understanding I felt. The fact that I had seen myself in her choices. That was guilt enough. My mind wouldn't shut up. I kept replaying the moment over and over. The way she looked at him. The way she looked at me. The way she knew I had seen her and didn't care. Or maybe she did care, just not in the way I expected. What if she wanted to be seen? What if, deep down, she needed someone to acknowledge what she was doing before she convinced herself it wasn't real? And then, the worst thought of all crept in, slow and quiet, like a whisper I couldn't block out. What if this wasn't the first time? What if this was just one moment in a long string of moments no one ever talked about? And what if marriages, the ones that looked perfect on the outside, the ones we all believed in, what if they weren't broken all at once, but chipped away slowly, piece by piece, until there was nothing left? I thought about my pastor. About the church. About the people who trusted them, who looked up to them as examples of what love was supposed to look like. And then, I thought about my own marriage. About how long it had been since my wife looked at me like I was her person. And suddenly, I wasn't just thinking about her mistakes. I was thinking about my own. What do I do with this? Do I tell my pastor? Do I look him in the eye on Sunday morning and tell him I saw his wife disappear into an elevator with another man? Do I pretend I never saw anything? Let them deal with their own secrets. Maybe it's not my place to say anything. Maybe I misunderstood what I saw. Or maybe that's just the excuse people make when they don't want to be the one to set a fire. I wanted to believe in marriage. In love. In trust. But now, sitting here, watching my own reflection, all I could see was the fragility of it all. Because trust, it doesn't shatter all at once. It cracks. Slowly. Quietly. Until one day, you wake up next to someone who feels like a stranger. And if I wasn't careful, that stranger would be me. I barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw it. The way she leaned in. The way he touched her back. The slow, deliberate press of the elevator button. The way she looked at me just before the doors slid shut. That damn look. I had spent all night trying to convince myself that it wasn't my problem. That it wasn't my business. But the truth? It was sitting in my chest like a stone. Heavy. Unmovable. And the worst part? I wasn't even sure what I wanted to do about it. And just like that, she was here. As if last night was nothing. As if it never happened. I expected her to look different. To look changed somehow. But she wasn't. She was the same woman who smiled politely at church on Sunday mornings, the same woman who led the prayer circle, the same woman whose husband stood on the pulpit, talking about commitment and faith. And I hated how easily she wore it. How effortlessly she stepped back into her role. Like last night was just another part of her routine. I braced myself for something. Maybe guilt. Maybe regret. Maybe even fear. But no. That's not what I saw. She didn't look startled. She didn't fumble with her plate. She didn't avert her eyes. Instead, she just nodded. A small, polite nod. The kind you give to an acquaintance in passing. Like I was just another guest in the hotel, just another familiar face in a sea of strangers. And then, just as effortlessly as she acknowledged me, she turned back to her breakfast as if nothing had happened at all. I felt unsteady. Like the floor beneath me had shifted and I was the only one who noticed. Because that nod, that tiny, insignificant gesture, wasn't an accident. It wasn't meaningless. It was a message. She wasn't asking me for silence. She wasn't pleading for secrecy. She wasn't begging me not to tell. She already knew I wouldn't. I felt sick. Did I just witness a mistake? Some moment of weakness she would regret for the rest of her life? Or has this been happening all along? How many times has she done this? How many hotel bars? How many unfamiliar hands on her skin? How many stolen nights in rooms that weren't hers? And if she could slip so seamlessly between the two versions of herself, the devoted wife, the woman in the elevator, then how many others could do the same? How many people sitting in that very room had their own secrets tucked away between conference calls and complimentary breakfasts? But I knew better now. I knew that the perfect picture people paint of themselves, the carefully curated smiles, the small talk, the rings on their fingers, could mean absolutely nothing. Because beneath it all, under the surface, we are all capable of things we never thought we'd do. And once you know that, you can't unknow it. I could pretend this morning was just like any other. It didn't start with a hotel room key slipping into a palm. It started long before that. With a conversation. With a laugh. With a glance held just a second too long. That's all it takes. A crack. A moment where you stop thinking about the consequences and start thinking about how good it feels to be seen. To be wanted. To feel alive again. And once you let that door open, even just a little, it's nearly impossible to close it. Maybe it's not about good or bad people. Maybe it's about lonely people making bad choices. Maybe the difference between the faithful and the unfaithful isn't a matter of morality, it's a matter of opportunity. Of circumstance. Of timing. Because the truth is, none of us think we're capable of it. We tell ourselves we would never. We convince ourselves that love is enough. That loyalty is a choice we'd always make. Until the day we don't. Until the day we find ourselves in a quiet hotel bar, watching someone who isn't ours laugh in the kind of way that makes us feel like we matter again. And suddenly, all the lines we swore we'd never cross, start to blur. Should I have said something to her? Should I have stopped her? Would she have even listened? Or was it too late the moment she touched his arm? The moment she decided she wasn't going to be a pastor's wife that night, she was just going to be a woman, letting herself feel something she hadn't felt in a long time. And what about me? What if I had been the man sitting next to her at that bar? What if I had leaned in just a little closer, let myself entertain the idea, let myself want to be wanted? Would I have stopped? Or would I have followed her into that elevator? I still don't know what the right answer is. Maybe there isn't one. Maybe that's the scariest part of all. Because it's easy to say what you would do when it's not you in the moment. But when you're the one staring at temptation, when you're the one feeling unseen in your own life, when you're the one holding the match with dry wood at your feet, you start to wonder if fire really burns as bad as they say it does. Have you ever seen something you wish you hadn't? Something that changed the way you looked at someone? Or worse, something that changed the way you looked at yourself? If you were me, sitting in that hotel bar, watching a woman you thought you knew make a choice she could never take back, what would you have done? Would you have confronted her? Would you have told someone? Or would you have done exactly what I did? Sat there. Said nothing. Let it happen. Because maybe, deep down, you understood why it did. Maybe you saw a part of yourself in that moment. And maybe that scared you more than anything else. I want to know, what would you have done? Would you have spoken up, or kept it to yourself? Have you ever found yourself in a situation where you knew something you were never meant to know? And if you did, how did it change you? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I'll be reading every single one. Because the truth is, stories like this, they happen every single day. And not just to them. To us. To people who swore they'd never be in that position. To people who thought their marriages were unbreakable. To people who never thought they'd have to ask themselves, what would I do? Until one day, they do. For more real-life stories that challenge our morals and beliefs, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. You won't believe what's coming next. You ever notice how quiet a city feels when you're looking at it from above? All those people. All those lives. Thousands of stories playing out at the same time. And yet, no one really knows what's happening behind closed doors. No one knows who's keeping secrets. Who's making mistakes. Who's standing on the edge of a choice that could change everything. I used to think that affairs were loud. Explosive. Messy. The kind of thing that shattered lives in a single, dramatic moment. But now I realize, that's not how it happens. It happens in silence. In the smallest moments. A glance. A touch. A laugh that lingers for a second too long. And before you know it, you've crossed a line you swore you never would. I want to say that I was different. That I could never be that kind of man. But last night, I wasn't so sure. Because if I had been in his seat at that bar, if she had looked at me the way she looked at him, if she had leaned in, whispered something, invited me into a moment I could never take back. Would I have said no? Or would I have told myself exactly what she was probably telling herself in that elevator? That it was just one night. That no one had to know. That what they didn't see, couldn't hurt them. In the end, we all have secrets. Some, we take to the grave. Others, well, they find a way of catching up with us. And the worst part? Sometimes, the biggest secret of all, is the one we keep from ourselves.